Imperialism has existed since the beginning of time, but in 1870, new imperialism began to gain prominence. New imperialism differed from old imperialism in that new imperialism was focused on creating spheres of influence and imposing cultures on the newly conquered territories. Driven primarily by nationalism and the desire to increase empires abroad, this endeavor increased tensions between European countries. In 1884, Otto von Bismarck sought to reduce European tensions by setting effective occupation as a criteria to hold territory abroad. The scramble for Africa was by far the most spectacular manifestation of imperialism.
I spent the first half of my career trying to unite Germany with blood, sweat, and iron. Now my only aim in life is to maintain the peace between you great European powers. And your actions in Africa have disgusted me.
But I thought you didn't care about Africa.
I don't. I just don't want another European war.
South African imperialism began with the Congress of Vienna in 1815, by which South Africa came under British rule and would create a struggle for independence from the Dutch settlers called the Boers. Their actions towards moving away from British rule began with the Great Trek to the northern parts of the Transvaal. Cecil Rhodes, as governor of Cape Colony, seized the land north of the Boers and soon discovered that there were diamonds in the Transvaal. To protect these lands, he became a major player in the Boer Wars, in which he convinced the British to protect Kimberley. Under General Joubert, the Boers became a very real threat to Cecil Rhodes and the British. General Joubert purchased modern field guns and automatic weapons from the German company Krupp. It was under these circumstances that Cecil Rhodes was motivated to seek help from Colonel Kekewich and George Lebrun, who provided Rhodes with an army and new weapons, including the Long Cecil.
Hello, General Kekewich.
I heard of your situation. Most of my soldiers are De Beers employees, and so I'd be obliged to help guard Kimberley.
Excellent. But who is this man that you've brought with you?
I brought the top engineer within my garrison to show you his latest invention, which we will use while defending Kimberley against the Boers.
This is my Long Cecil. This will surely put Krupp's weapons to shame. General Joubert has nothing on this baby.
Okay then, General Kekewich. Take half your battalion to the North Lancaster Regiment and make sure to block off the advancing Boers. I trust you.
The Boer War of 1899 to 1900 proved to be utterly devastating to both armies. This particular war was marked with constant rejection of established rules of war, causing as many as 14,000 casualties, not including the nearly 13,000 killed solely by disease. The British Army, unable to fight the Boers using conventional tactics, adopted many of the Boer methods, and the war degenerated into a devastating and cruel struggle between British righteous might and Boer nationalist desperation. The British crisscrossed the countryside with blockhouses to flush the Boers into the open. They burnt farms and confiscated foodstuffs to prevent them from falling into Boer hands. By the time the war was over, the Boer lands had been left in ruins. The British also packed off Boer women and children to concentration camps. Not only did the Boers lose their independence to the British, they also lost thousands of women and children from the camps. Also, thousands of native South Africans lost their lives in a war that had nothing to do with them. The war destroyed the Boer way of life completely. However, the consequences of such a dramatic war was not limited to the Boers. The war had devastated the Afrikaners economically and psychologically. In the course of the 20th century, the Afrikaners took control of South African politics, and they resolved to become independent of the British sphere of influence. This form of government established was known as an apartheid government, created by Paul Kruger, representative of the Afrikaners during the Boer War, in which the black South African majority were governed by a white minority. This concept reasserted the assumption that the Boer War was surely a white man's war.
From the imposition of European cultures to the seizing of lands in Africa, imperialism has left a deep wound in Africa.
The Berlin Conference of 1844 had not only set rules for the partition of Africa, but it had also officially stated that European countries could levy the land between them regardless of what the African occupants did. The Boer Wars are examples of reactions from African tribes, and their losses foreshadowed what was to become of Africa. The White Man's Burden by Joseph Rudyard Kipling and his tale of British imperialism, The Jungle Book, exemplified the ideas held by Europeans that it was their duty to civilize third world countries.
Clearly, the rise of new imperialism was not one of the greater happenings in European history, as it led to the destruction of native ways of life and unnecessarily caused the loss of thousands of lives. The colonial disputes it brought about were one of the contributing factors to the outbreak of war in 1914. The question that will forever remain in our minds is, was the desire for new territory really worth the consequences?
Misha, what are you doing?
I never gave the book back to Mr. Valentine.